Ladies and gentlemen, we begin business session 1. I now invite the chairman of this session, Mr. Sridhar Ganesh, Director HR Murugappa Group, to please take his place on the dais. A big round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. Please welcome the chairman. I also invite the distinguished speakers, Mr. Rajiv Krishnan, Partner, People and Organization, Ernst & Young, and Mr. A. Vishwanathan, Managing Director, Visteon, Chennai. Mr. Sridhar Ganesh is the Director of HR and Lead Director, Diversified Business Group of Murugappa. He is an alumnus of IIM Calcutta with special interest in the areas of strategy, leadership development, people engagement and coaching. His career spans over 35 years and has worked across the HR function in organizations of repute. He has extensive experience in the areas of developing people strategy, building organization culture, leadership development and coaching for performance. He is a practicing coach and a certified MBTI trainer. Mr. Sridhar Ganesh is a member of the Advisory Council of Loyola Institute of Business Administration and the CII National Committee on Skills and Human Resource. Chairperson of the CII Southern Region Task Force on HR, Employability, Affirmative Action and ITI-IMC. is also associated with the Junior Achievement Organization promoting employability amongst high school students in Chennai. Welcome, Mr. Sridhar Ganesh. Mr. Rajiv Krishnan is Partner, People and Organization, Ernst & Young. He manages the southern markets for the People and Organization practice of Ernst & Young. He has about 3 decades of experience, having started his career in project marketing at Escorts. He later shifted to consulting and joined Malfoy Management Consultants Limited, which is now Randstad Group. Mr. Rajiv built the temporary staffing, payroll, HR automation and outsourcing businesses and was last the CEO of consulting and outsourcing business. He then moved to Mumbai to set up the India business of Development Dimensions International, the global leader in talent management, and he was first managing director in India. His most recent assignment was with Mercer Consulting as India business leader, human capital, a mechanical engineer from NIT Trichy, and also a postgraduate diploma in business management from XLRI Jamshedpur. Very warm welcome to you, sir, Mr. Rajiv. We also have with us Mr. A. Vishwanathan, Managing Director, Visteon. His extensive career spans finance, operations, marketing, HR, corporate planning and strategy, and includes working with multinational companies, large Indian industrial house, as well as with management consulting firm, and extends to diverse industries such as automotive, petrochemicals, infrastructure, fertilizers. And his academic background includes professional qualifications in finance, engineering, marketing, information technology, and law. Very warm welcome to you, sir, Mr. Vishwanathan. I now hand over the proceedings to Mr. Sridhar Ganesh, who will chair the session. And also, ladies and gentlemen, there is a question slip kept in your kit. We will have an interactive session at the end of the session, so you could send your question to our chairman. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I understand you had a fantastic session, this first one that you had now. And my 2 panelists here confirm that this will be even better than that, so be prepared. How's that for a start? Right? Now, this topic for this session is somewhat, HR-ish language, you must understand, Are we ready for knowledge work? Are we ready for the new, something? As if, there's already a talk about the world coming to an end. NASA has disconfirmed that report, so you can all sit down safely. Then nothing is going to happen on the 21st. We will all be there on the 22nd and continue to smile. All right? Okay? So, as you can see, as India, the industrial India, wants to seek a seat in the table of industrialized nations, it is but natural that we need to move up what we call the value chain. A value chain is very simple. It has got its own management jargon in terms of what is value chain and so on and so forth. We on this side of the table of management like to make it as complex as possible because then we sort of go up in value. All right? It's simply that tailor becoming a fashion designer. Okay? That's going up the value chain. A man who writes a code now becomes a system designer, right? So that's what we mean by value chain. So this is our challenge, what we wish to discuss for the next 45 minutes, thanks to my two eminent panelists, and I have the easier job to do, which is to hopefully to listen and perhaps make some notes, is to talk about, is India ready? What are the challenges in terms of the knowledge worker? Because as you move up the value chain, you need more capability, you need more intellectual capital. So this is what we are talking about. I recall my very early days. Now I'm very ancient, as you can make out. So when I started my career many years ago, I used to work in a company which is no more, called GKW. And incidentally, if you ever draw the conclusion that it is no more because of me, it would be erroneous. This was in Calcutta. I used to be an employee relations officer doing industrial relations those days. You know, the tough eyeball to eyeball, Naxal unions, Marxist unions, and so on. And we used to have a fasteners division where through a hot forging process, you heat up this metal and bring it to shape by a weight on top of it. And you used to make fasteners essentially for the railways, because auto industry in the mid-70s was just about starting. We had two auto companies, or three, I think. All the three ports were taken, Calcutta, Bombay, and Madras. So that is where we started, and that is where and I recall this fasteners division of GKW, then slowly moving towards cold forging, because that's where you brought in precision. So your nuts and bolts and your screws all became a little more precise, and that is what industry sought. And therefore, you added greater value, and therefore you commanded greater premium and price. And that's what we're interested in. I always believe that the framework for a business actually sits on three legs. Any business that you see has, in my view, three legs on which it stands. It's a three-legged stool. Largely, businesses talk about two legs, largely, and they talk about growth and they talk about efficiency. I don't think there is any business in this world, whichever business you are in, which does not talk about growth or does not talk about efficiency. When times of crisis, times of depressed demand like we have today, we talk about efficiency, we talk about improving our margins and ensure that the EBITDA of the business is better, because we can't grow the top line. At times when it is a little better, when it is a little more safer, and there is RBI cuts down the interest rates and there is a certain buoyancy of demand, then of course we talk about growth and improving the top line, which automatically improves contribution and therefore the bottom line. I think the third leg to me is the leg of capability, and that is where I think you and I, largely from the HR fraternity, come in terms of how do we build this capability in an organization. So that is where I think our relevance is increasingly felt. Capability in terms of bringing together, bringing forth skills, mindsets, the body, mind, and spirit in terms of the feeling, in terms of the heart, the mindset in terms of the mind, and the skill set in terms of the set of hands that we bring. I think this is where HR as a function comes in. I don't like this word HR really. I believe that we are, Dave Aldrich brought in some changes to this whole profession by talking about a strategic business partner some 10 years ago. And I increasingly believe that we have to wear the mantle and the image and the mindset of being a value maximizer. Are we a value maximizer? Are we maximizing value for the business in everything that we do, be it recruitment, be it induction, be it appraisal, be it development, be it career planning, so on and so forth. So I think the relevance is really in terms of building this capability. So I'm not going to take more time than just to lay down this foundation and this background to you and say we have two sort of perspectives here. One from perhaps the consulting space of Ernst & Young, which brings its own perspective to bear. And we have from the traditional, what one would call it, the brick and mortar, the sort of industry that I grew up in. And Vishwanathan from Vistion represents that type of industry which basically believes in people skills and mindsets and so on and so forth. So Without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to sort of lay this background and say, welcome my two panelists. It would be wonderful if you could give them a rousing round of applause and welcome them to this session. Who would like to go first? Will you toss a coin? They decided they're very good guys. They don't want to toss a coin.
So the good thing about starting first is that I can kind of listen in a slightly relaxed way when Mr. Vishwanathan is speaking. Thanks, Sridhar. Thank you. And thanks to MMA that I'm here before an audience in Chennai after a long gap. So I'm returning to the city after a bit of, kind of Bharat Darshan and back here for the last 2-3 months. So thanks, MMA, for the opportunity to be here. Thanks. Is that okay? This way. Yeah, it's okay. Yeah, thanks. So I've got a few pieces of research, to look at what's happening relating to talent management, how are firms managing it effectively, what are the things that are going to matter, as well as a couple of very brief case studies as to, where organizations are succeeding and where they are not. So I present this to you. A lot of this research comes from ENY's own research on talent management, and I'm happy to present this to you. But before we start off, the first thing is we heard, the first two sessions talking about the immense potential, the huge amount of talent which is there in the country and so on. So let's look at some quick figures around this. I'm not sure, there's a lot of data here, not sure they can really see it at the back, but let me just summarize this for you. So the feeling is that over the next 10 or 15 years, specifically by 2030, the two economies which are really going to matter in terms of GDP are going to be India and China. And what is really going to help India, and this is a very critical thing, is that it's actually what you call as the dependent population or the dependency ratio, which is basically the ratio of the number of people in the workforce to the number of people who are outside the workforce. Okay? And this ratio for India is going to get lower and lower, which means the number of people who are dependent are going to be lesser and lesser, and the number in the workforce are going to be much higher. And for some of the countries, it's expected that the number of people who are dependents are going to be a multiple of those who are in the workforce. Okay, so if you look at something like that, the odds are in favor of India emerging as a key, talent hub, and this turning into a competitive advantage for the country itself. And one other movement which is happening slowly, so there is the IT story, there is the BPO story, you heard about that from Raju, you heard about it from Ravi, but what the silent revolution, if you can call it that, which is happening is actually the Indian market or Indian industry, specifically the manufacturing sector, becoming a huge hub for global production. Okay? But this brings with it its own challenges, and I'll just dwell on this very briefly. I am not an expert in terms of the skill, the skill gap as to, which are the skills in which, we are ahead and what we are going to need as we go along. But the moot point here is that currently just about 5% are constitute what you can call as the employable part of the workforce. So if you look at people entering the workforce, only 5% are considered to be employable. And here I've had a question which I'm just posing to the audience, is that I'm just wondering whether a study of this kind was done anywhere else in the world. So what, for example, would be the percentage of American graduates who are employable? So that's always a question which I've had. Or let's say graduates from Europe who are employable. And here is actually a kind of a moot point, that it can be a hypothesis that nobody is really ready for working when you come out of any university in the world. And there is something which is required to bridge that gap. But in what you can call as maybe a kind of a tendency for self-flagellation, we tend to assume that that ratio is the worst in India and that Indians produce the least employable graduates anywhere in the world. That's actually a point which I would like to contest, and maybe if anyone has data on that, I'd like to know a little more about that. But be that as it may, the fact is that currently that figure is quite low. And if you see this graph in terms of the way in which the number of people entering the workforce are really going to increase, and if you extrapolate the same level of employability, then you have a very huge gap which remains to be filled. So if you want India to become that talent hub, that 500 million skilled people, there is a very huge gap which needs to be bridged. This gap can be bridged by four stakeholders, or four parts of society, or whatever you want to call it. So there is government on one side, there are business leaders, there is the HR fraternity, and there are the educational institutions. I'll probably look a little bit at the business leaders and the HR fraternity, given that there's enough being said about how the National Skills Development Council is operating, how they're moving ahead, the different kinds of streams which are there in it, as well as what education institutions are doing in terms of creating an employable workforce. So if you look at the growth story of India, and if you analyze it, and this is specific to maybe Indian firms going global. So if we talk about the Tata Group or the Aditya Birla Group, or even the smaller groups which are going into acquisitions today, there are four things which are really going to determine whether these firms are going to really succeed. And so there is something called the business drivers. So as to what is it that is going to ensure that they're able to grow in new markets, speed and flexibility which is required for kind of leveraging on it, the cost competitiveness, and the stakeholder focus which is there. I'll just speak on one theme. So if you look at a large Indian firm going overseas, the tendency is that you take the senior most people in the Indian firm and you post them as the the country heads or into roles of responsibility in a new country. So it's something like the next level of responsibility for an Indian leader, when if he has reached the top, is to move into a new environment. And some of these are kind of questions which can be contested. So a person without any exposure to global markets being moved very suddenly into a new market, just on the basis of India experience, is that the right path to go? Or do you go through leadership, rotations where people at different levels of the leadership pipeline get a chance, get exposure, and through that it's built. So these are some of the things which we have encountered as we consulted with large Indian groups, or even maybe the medium-sized Indian groups which are going overseas, and where do they get the right talent for it? Right? So we look at some of the typical talent management challenges which organizations face, and I'll probably just start with a case study. So this is a firm which hires several thousand people a year, and when an analysis was done as to what are the parts of the selection process, is it the interview, is it the technical test, and is it something else? Which has a correlation with performance. Because ultimately, when you're doing a selection process, you want to determine that high performance on the selection process translates into high performance on the job. And in this particular firm, which we studied, an HR leader said that of all the processes, of all the things, criteria which we looked at, maybe the highest correlation appeared to be between the 10 standard marks and high performance. Now, that may not be the intention of a selection process. I mean, you don't want the maximum correlation to rest with, something which happened 7-8 years before the person, kind of applied for the job. And you'd probably it would have been better if they said that the interview had the maximum correlation or the technical test had the maximum correlation. But this was something, and yet the firm was hiring year after year using the same processes, and it took them a fair bit of time to do this analysis and to find out that maybe in this case a coin toss would have produced a better result. So a candidate walks in, you toss a coin, and head or tail you decide whether to take the person or not. So that was how effective the selection process was. And it's a strange thing, but many firms today use selection processes. They could be tests, psychographic instruments, technical tests, different kinds of things which are developed in another country. And in those countries, these go through a process of validation where the firm would really find out in their context. So the tool or the instrument per se would have its own validity, but you try it in the context of your firm and you find out what the validity is, what the correlation coefficient is, and then you decide to use it, and then you can also tweak those tools in a way so that the parts of it, the scales and subscales which have the maximum correlation are kind of, retained. But none of that seems to happen, and a process is just, kind of put in place. You take one test from firm A, you take another one from firm B, and you create something. And when it comes to checking out actually is there correlation, it never gets measured, right? So moving on to what actually happens in the talent management space, and this is a very, very recent piece of research which we did where we studied two groups of firms, those which were high performers in terms of typical, profitability and metrics of those kind, and those which were low performers. So I'm sorry, this may be a little small to see, to actually read, but basically, in terms of actual processes which impact people. So which is in terms of linking your talent management policies to the business environment. They could be in terms of actually, investing in a way that you can meet financial targets. There's actually not much to choose between the high performers and the low performers. Okay, so the figures per se, in terms of a self-stated report, whether they regarded their systems as effective was quite low. It wasn't more than 66% on any of these factors. And the difference between the high-performing firms and the low-performing firms was kind of scarily narrow. They were almost at the same level. And another challenge which, when we asked organizations, how would you measure whether you have a good talent management system? So what are the metrics that you would use? The tendency was to come out with things which were a little, what you can call as, in terms of metrics, a little over the hill, So you had things like employee satisfaction, which was used. You had retention rates, which were used, and an external reputation of the organization as an employer. But certain key things, which was something like the level of cross-functional collaboration or the extent of skill gaps which were there were not really, kind of looked at. Okay, and here is a quote from from an expert where he says that if you have maybe a mediocre workforce and that workforce has been in place for 20 years, attrition levels are low, it doesn't mean that you have the right talent management process. Okay, it's a fairly useless statistic to find out whether a mediocre person stayed in the firm for about 20 years or so. Right? So in terms of how do you ensure that you have the right model, that you measure it and so on, the three things which seem to emerge are thinking long term, something you can't really find, whether any initiative which you're having in talent management in a 2-year or a 3-year kind of a time frame, whether it's really working, it's difficult to get that. And you have to have the right outcome to measure. So is it really something, which is what you can call as a lag indicator or something which looks backward in terms of, a statistic, or is it something which is, kind of predictive of the future? And the third thing is, of course, the point which has been mentioned in several of these sessions, which is around execution. Often the results of talent management are not evident. You can't suddenly make out whether have we become a very talent, focused firm, have we moved up the scale, and what's been the change. So it's very tempting to abandon them. And frequently you find with changes of CEOs or with changes of HR directors, you find that a certain kind of a methodology, a certain approach finds favor, or it gets kind of dumped. Okay. So some best practices which in the course of a consulting practice which we have seen. So there is I'll start maybe not in the order in which it is. So there is certainly a kind of a very huge focus on pay for performance which is there. And typically organizations are moving into a 50-50 kind of a thing which is there. And there was enough and more said about Gen Y, but that is becoming a very important factor today as to how do you engage with them and how do you basically inculcate a sense of pride and ownership which is there. So there are examples which are legion about firms which have taken certain initiatives which impact that group. So there are examples of technology companies where there have been hastily implemented policies which has led to a lot of noise, a lot of criticism on social media and so on, from which the company took years to recover. And certain other things like, so if you look at a lot of firms today, they are going to the schools. So they are going, it's not just the engineering colleges, but it is actually the schools where they're trying to build their brand equity and they're trying to ensure that their firms are known and people think of their firm as a, as a kind of a possible employer for them. So I'll just, in the interest of time, maybe just move on very quickly to another case which is very interesting, and this is a firm in the technology sector having more than 50,000 people and actually having a very peculiar situation, So there are about 10 to 15% of the employees on the bench. And yet the firm was hiring quite a bit, both in terms of permanent employees as well as in terms of temporary employees. So this is the conundrum. Okay, you have 10% of your workforce idle, maybe kind of just waiting for the next assignment or project to come, and yet you are hiring from outside. So typically the things which you see in any talent management, in any what you can call as a success profile, is that you look at these factors. You look at knowledge, behavioral competencies, skills, and personal attributes. And through on the basis of this, you kind of grade your employees, or you kind of divide them into different groups and so on. So in the case of this organization, they found that these became extremely complicated, so to say. So if you looked at if I had to give, let's say, some kind of a talent tag, so to speak, to an employee. Okay, so just imagine the scenario, you have 50,000 plus people in many countries and many business units having different kinds of skills and capabilities. Maybe they had, experience in different kinds of domains, platforms and technologies. And then you had a project where you needed about 200 people to work in a particular country. And you couldn't even find out where these people were. Okay, so the mere task of tagging these people become almost like something like a DNA, a double helix kind of a model, where you have all these factors with a lot of things which go into it, and then these also changing in terms of the relative importance during the employee life cycle. So some factor, so you heard Ravi Vishwanathan saying that he started as a COBOL programmer, but today if he had to, kind of do that, he would probably struggle. So some things like domain, platform, technology are important at the level when you're coding and when you're maybe, kind of handling a project. But when you become a, kind of maybe an account delivery head and so on, nobody is going to ask about the domain and the platform. So that kind of receipt. So it's almost like the double helix where certain things are important today. They kind of take a bit of a turn and they become less important. But the main thing is that you are able to tag the employee correctly from the talent management point of view. And you have governance and things like that around changing those, as the person, takes on gets more experience or gets, different kinds of exposure, how those things change over a period of time. So with these, kind of thoughts, I'll probably hand over to my distinguished co-panelist, and we can have questions at the end of the thing. Right? Thanks a lot. Thank you.
Thanks, Rajiv. It was a great presentation, and it's not easy to follow the presentation from a great consultancy firm. But I'll stick to what I know best, which is about the brick and mortar, the manufacturing portion of it, from a knowledge worker point of view. And when I started putting this together yesterday, one of the thoughts that came to my mind is it's a little bit anachronistic to say that this is going to be manufacturing, because at the end of the day, you look at manufacturing and really, the about 35% of the manufacturing revenue is really going towards payment for services. And again, you look at the inputs within the manufacturing sector itself. A lot of it is service jobs that are in the manufacturing sector. So you really can't today, in this knowledge era, say where manufacturing stops and where service starts. So it's really a blending of both. So I'll start with the value that companies create through knowledge, then get into knowledge worker itself, because there's a lot of debate over what knowledge worker means, and then get into the national manufacturing plan, the vision that the government put together, and where are we against those objectives, and then talk about way ahead, something in terms of what the government needs to do, what industry needs to do, and what individual organizations need to do. Can you imagine Facebook, when it came out with its IPO, the value was more than $100 billion. That's where it was listed. Of course, it's come down significantly since then, but at least if you start with where the original valuation was, it was more than $100 billion. And what assets do they really have? Apart from computers, what's the asset they have? So where is that value coming from? Anybody? Where is the value of Facebook? And compare that with the largest automotive companies like General Motors or Toyota, and their market cap used to be less than $10 billion. And a company like Facebook having a valuation that's 10 times more than a company like General Motors, for instance. So where is the value coming from? Anybody? value of information, the value of knowledge, the knowledge that's created, and how well they exploit the knowledge. And I just pulled out this list of top 10 companies by market cap from Financial Times. And you look at that, and 5 of them are really resource companies, but the other 5 is about how well they use knowledge, process knowledge, whether it's, even if you take a company like Apple, do you call it a real manufacturing company? I'm not sure. What do they manufacture? Most of it is really outsourced. A lot of it is about how they understand the customer best, what are their needs, and how they utilize that knowledge to develop products and then get someone else to manufacture products. Just to give you an additional detail about Apple, Apple has a total of about 50,000 employees working for them, and they have more than 10 lakh employees working in their contract outsourced companies which are doing the manufacturing. But the real value, a lot of it is created by just 50,000 people. And that was the most valuable company last year. I always had this feeling that India was way behind in terms of patent creation, although we stood number 2 in the world in terms of numbers of engineers passing out every year. But what shocked me when I looked at the data from the net yesterday was I went through the top 15 countries with most patent filings in 2011, and India was not even figuring in that. And then I looked at what's the number of patents India filed last year, just 857. And compare that with the engineers graduating every year, and what that means is the US had something like ratio of patents filed to the number of engineers passing out every year was something like 70%. China was about 3%, and India was 0.2%. The concept of knowledge worker was introduced almost 50 years back by Peter Drucker in his publication, The Age of Discontinuity. And, there are 3 things which come out of this. First is, he looks at knowledge worker in terms of one who develops and uses knowledge in the workplace. The shop floor associate is the smallest but the most important unit of a manufacturing organization. Typically, whenever we talk of knowledge workers, we always tend to think of knowledge worker only in terms of not the blue collar or the white collar, but what they call as the gold collar. And we think they are high-paid R&D engineers or software engineers who are the real knowledge workers. But people in the shop floor can also use and process knowledge. Now, the degrees may vary. Someone on the shop floor may be doing utilization of knowledge 5% of the time, and 95% of the time he may be a manual worker. But there is an enormous potential for us to tap in terms of the knowledge even from the shop floor employees. And I think that's one of the areas where if India wants to be a global player in manufacturing, we need to do better at. China has moved significantly down that road in the last few years. And I'll give you a couple of examples. One is Maruti, for instance. I was talking the other day to the HR director of Maruti, and he was telling me the savings that they do and every year from the suggestions that come from shop floor employees. The value of that is something like 100 crores of rupees. Unimaginable. And he says that a significant part of their cost increases they're able to offset through these suggestion schemes that they're able to implement. And they've got a wonderful system whereby these suggestions are captured, they are forwarded to the right people, and they have to actually respond to, the managers have to respond to those suggestions within a certain time frame, and if that doesn't happen, it goes automatically, gets escalated to the next level. The other organization I heard of was Toyota, where in their monthly report that goes to the chairman of Toyota Motors, one of the metrics that he looks at, and he gets most worried if there's an adverse change in that metric, that's number of suggestions per employee per month. This is a more recent expansion of the concept of knowledge workers, and this is by someone who's an authority on knowledge workers and has many publications to her credit, Ms. Swart, and what she mentions is also about wealth being increasingly created by effective management of knowledge workers rather than just efficient control of physical and financial assets. I'll just briefly dwell on the national manufacturing policy. I'll put that in the context of the fact that if we are talking of scaling up as a country, one of the things we need to look at is this, it's a brilliant document, the National Manufacturing Policy. It aims to increase share of manufacturing from about 15% it is today to 25% by 2022. And it aims to do this by creating a series of national manufacturing and industrial zones, something like about 10 across the country to start with. And through this, they hope to create 100 million additional jobs in manufacturing. And part of it is about simplifying existing industrial laws and policies and creating additional skill sets. But when you do a deep dive into that, first of all, there are no milestones set. This is a document that was created about a year ago and with targets to be achieved by 2022, but I don't see annual milestones. I was in Malaysia 10 years back, and Malaysia in 1995 came up with this Vision 2020 where they said in 25 years, they will take Malaysia to the status of a developed country. And when they announced it in 1995, they had yearly targets set up. And every year, they used to go back, just like the budget, there is, along with the budget, every year when the Malaysian government announces the federal budget, they announce where they are on this roadmap against 2020. And what was the yearly targets, where are they, and there are quarterly metrics that are being published, shared across the country, and there's a lot of debate and discussion taking place. I don't see enough of that here in India against the national manufacturing policy. Again, there isn't enough focus as you go through the document on technology innovation or, for that matter, knowledge workers. While there is a lot of talk on skill development, I don't think there is enough to really get to the scale that we are talking of. Let me give you an example from China. Last year, China had a marathon event. Not the marathon that the TCS CEO was patronizing, but this was a marathon technology event. It lasted for about a month, and the whole nation was engaged in that. And the way it started was, the Chinese government said, what are the top 50 technologies that are going to shape the world in future? And they wanted to assess each technology, what is required for that technology in terms of skills, in terms of institution building, and in terms of resources, and where is China against each of those, and what can they do over the next 10, 20 years to dominate that technology. And out of that 50 technologies, they decided to choose the 20 ideal technologies for China. And over a month, they brought experts from the world in each area. And for weeks, they were actually having parallel sessions on each technology, bringing the best minds in the world, corporates together globally, and those in China together in Beijing to debate what does China need to do. And this was, the tone for all this was set at the top with the president, the prime minister, and the entire Communist Party involved in this. This is what we really need to do if we have to scale up as a country from the manufacturing point of view. Again, you look at the inefficiencies due to low value addition, lack of scale, branding. These are things which plague us, and I also want to just briefly touch about soft capabilities. There was a lot of talk in the last session on war for talent. What comes to my mind is, the war for talent is already over and talent has won. But the real issue is a story that a Japanese gentleman from one of the large Japanese conglomerates mentioned to me over dinner. This was after a few drinks, and he told me, 1 Indian equal to 10 Japanese. So I felt very good about it, and I nodded in agreement. His next statement was, he asked me, 10 Indians equal to how many Japanese? I said, why is he asking me this question? So I told him, 10 Indians equal to 100 Japanese, 1 equal to 10. He said, no, I don't know, that's not right. I said, you only told me 1 Indian equal to 10 Japanese, so 10 Indians equal to 100 Japanese. And he said, no. He said, 10 Indians equal to 1 Japanese. And he said, the problem is that you guys don't work in teams very well. You are very good chess players, but you don't do a good job as a soccer team, as a cricket team. And I think that's one, soft capability that we as a country really need to overcome and do better at. You look at Korea, you look at Japan, you look at Taiwan, and a major factor behind their progress is how well they work as a team. Now with this, I'll come to the last section, which is the way ahead in terms of what government needs to do, what industry needs to do, and what individual organizations need to do. Also, I have 1 or 2 slides at the end of it in terms of, from a people perspective, what needs to be looked at. So from the government perspective, there has been the very great initiative of National Skills Development Corporation. I think they're doing a lot of very good work. They've initiated a lot of interactions with the industry. But given the enormity of the task, I think that's not enough. We really need to encourage in the private sector a lot of institutions like this to really work with the National Skills Development Corporations. And there are a few entrepreneurs who have got into this. Maybe we should call them social entrepreneurs who have got into this. But we need more of that from the industry, and with support and encouragement from the government. Again, the education system here is so academic, and a great example of a very practical education system would be Germany, and how well industry, government, and educational institutions work together to make sure that people coming out of colleges, Rajiv mentioned about 5%, I don't know what the number is in Germany, he said it's 5% in India, but I'm sure the number in Germany should be much higher, because all three work together to make sure that the graduates who come out are job ready. And one other thought that comes to my mind is what the Maharashtra government initiated in terms of an earn and learn scheme. What they said is diploma students, they work for about, I think, something like 4 days a week, and they study for about 3 days a week. So factories get access to young workmen at fairly competitive rates. And in addition to that, the students also earn something, so that encourages them to pursue and continue their education. Also, they learn practically. So with that kind of a system, and that started working well in Maharashtra, we need that kind of a system to be introduced in other states as well. And also, if you take the example of Taiwan and Korea, they have these knowledge clusters that they have developed with the required ecosystem, where both corporates, educational institutions, and the best minds in that particular field all work together. They have certain locations identified for that and developed. And the next one on inventory education programs is something, yesterday as I was coming home and thinking about what I need to talk and about preparing the slides together, I saw this investor education programs launched by Government of India. I saw a hoarding somewhere. Then I said, we also need an inventor education program. And what I mean by that is, if you look at the number of patents being filed in India, it's not as if enough technologies are not being developed in India, but we are not good at capturing those in a patent application and then filing the patents and getting the patents. Probably someone outside India is actually doing that for a technology developed in India. And finally, I'll come to tax incentives. Government has got this R&D weighted deduction which goes up to 200%, but it still doesn't cover all industries. It covers only a few industries. That needs to be expanded further. Second, a major constraint today in availing that incentive is that they say that the spending has to be within that particular plant. Now, what it means is today, there are a lot of outsourced engineering companies. TCS, for instance, would be doing a lot of engineering work for various manufacturing companies. And what you spend on that, that is an amount for which neither TCS nor the manufacturing company can claim deduction. And so that's another area which needs to be expanded by the government. Now, what does industry need to do? I think we need to work better with academia, do joint programs, joint research with universities, and make internships much better, and promote innovation on a large scale. Again, if you look at some of the Far Eastern countries, government has mandated an innovation officer for each company. And unlike in India, where we have a health and safety officer, they have mandated an innovation officer in each company above a certain size. And collaboration across the supply chain is another one. And then, of course, grow a culture of nurturing talent. Now, from an organization point of view, I think we need to improve culture, look at what is it that knowledge workers need to do. I think a lot of ITS companies have done very good work in terms of capturing the aspirations of knowledge workers and looking at what needs to be done from their point of view. I think that is something on which manufacturing sector can learn from the ITS sector and look at how do we understand aspirations of knowledge workers, provide an environment which is more empowering and has more trust factor involved in making sure that knowledge workers are able to enjoy a certain level of autonomy and meet their career aspirations. And I have a couple of slides, but in the interest of time, I will probably stop with this and we'll move on to the Q&A. Thank you.
We're open to questions now, and any of you, if you're wanting to ask us any questions, particularly if your questions can be targeted at the two panelists, I think it would add greater value in terms of what you take away from this session. I have a question to start with here. It says, a good tailor may be lost and a poor fashion designer gained. If reskilling, upskilling of role-based training is not provided, should HR not be futuristic in outlook? I think it should be, isn't it? The answer, if you're asked, somebody's asking me this question, Venkateshan from Advisory Consulting, I think HR should be futuristic. HR should look ahead in terms of saying, what do we need to do in terms of building those skills, so get good fashion designers. Please, why don't you? Do you have any questions yet?
A good question. From Mr. Venkatesan Seshadri. American European graduate is an oxymoron. Employability is a moving target as the world changes. Should we not focus instead on competency-based organizations? Probably not working with that. You can use this. Yeah, I'll just repeat that quickly. So, a question from Mr. Venkateshan Seshadri of Advisory Consultants. He says, American European graduates is an oxymoron. Employability is a moving target as the world changes. Should we not focus instead on competency-based organizations? So, I think that's a fair thing. So, one thing on the employability thing is, my only point was it's India is low, others are probably higher, but I think the gap is narrowing. It's also, the employability index is also moving ahead very quickly. Also, I'm not sure whether other countries are capturing it in the way that we are and, kind of obsessing over it at one level. So that was my point. The fact that there's a difference is not being contested at all. Relating to employability and competency-based organizations, so that was, so there were 2 points I was trying to make. One is that at a time when you don't have people of the right skills available, you also have a situation where companies don't have the right selection processes. Okay, so that combination is what is lethal. So if you know that out of a pool of 100 candidates, you have to pick 5 or 10, and your process doesn't capture that very accurately, then you are in a kind of a bigger mess. So that was one point. The other point was also that once people have come into the organization, we are not effectively harnessing the talent which is there by kind of figuring out something like a talent tag or whatever, and figuring out ways for people to move in career paths according to that. So in the case of the technology firm, they had the conundrum where you had people on the bench, and yet you are hiring from outside and kind of getting people. So you can imagine the overall financial waste that it resulted in, apart from people being less engaged and so on. Thanks.
Thank you, Raj.
One critical point in identifying and bridging this knowledge worker gap is to find out people with the right aptitude rather than people with the highest marks. I mean, this is a point which Mr. Rajiv Krishnan also touched. So probably it starts much lower, right from the school age. We probably take children who are the highest scorers and put them into IITs and NITs, whatever. They may not necessarily be the people who have the right aptitude. Similarly, when we go to the college and we graduate, we probably take the toppers and put them into IT industry. Probably they would have made a wonderful mechanical engineer. So how do we go for aptitude, and how do we incentivize that thing that we go for aptitude and the person in the right place goes to the right job where he is well fit? And how do these 3 dimensions we were talking about, industry, education and government, work together?
All right, I think it looks like a tough question, so I'll let Vishwanathan answer.
Thanks for the confidence, Sridhar. I'll try to start answering that, and then probably Rajiv and Sridhar can supplement. A lot of choice today is being driven by peer pressure, social pressure, and family pressure, although that's beginning to change. I think the father is a chartered accountant. He wants his son to be a chartered accountant, although the son may say, I want to be an engineer. But you're beginning to see today some of the students assert themselves and say that, no, I would like to actually not do chartered accountancy. I want to be a civil engineer. I want to be an aeronautical engineer. We are hearing more and more of that. Now, as far as the educational institutions are concerned, it's a good suggestion, in addition to looking at the marks, in addition to looking at the entrance tests, can you also do an aptitude test to see whether this person will be able to fit into that requirement? I think that's a good suggestion, something which educational institutions can definitely look at. And as far as companies are concerned today, you find companies not only just doing a test in terms of technical knowledge, but more and more companies are doing aptitude tests, behavior interviewing before they select people.
I think just only this to add to what Vish said is that I think there's a kind of a kind of a churn, or there's some kind of a turmoil which is happening, and it's going to take some time for it to find its own level. So while it's happening, we have some of the paradoxes which are there, which are in terms of people, everyone wanting to do engineering or wanting to do an MBA and so on. So this is basically a function of the fact that maybe also a hangover from the 70s and 80s when the sheer number of jobs were very limited. So a lot of people became chartered accountants not out of interest or aptitude, but surely it was just a survival mechanism, and likewise for engineering and so on. As we find the opportunities as they increase, then you have a situation which I think Mr. Deo captured quite well in the earlier thing, is that he does not want to hire an MBA. So there are jobs which are at certain skill levels where these people would simply, kind of get demotivated after a certain period of time. So similarly, if you look at a shop floor, assembly operation, so it's very important that you pick up a worker who has, the motivation to do that job day in and day out, for months and maybe for years. And not merely pick up the ITIs who have the, the highest marks and, kind of put them into it. Yes.
One of the issues here is that it is paid. I go to an IT industry because it pays more. May not be an automotive industry. So is there a way of incentivizing a person so that he goes to the job not just because of money?
Yeah, so I guess probably the answer to it is that it's a time of change, and I guess market forces, and if you look at the generation now, maybe my child and maybe people of her age group are not interested in pursuing engineering or chartered accountancy unless they have an aptitude in it. So that's already changing, and what you make as a software engineer, you are able to make comparable salaries in certain other areas of endeavor as well, which was not the case earlier. So earlier, that delta or that multiplier which was there between a top job and a not so great job was quite high. So if you got through the IAS, you became an IAS officer, else you started as a clerk. Okay, so if you got into engineering, you became an engineer, else you maybe started as a clerk in a bank. And those differentials were very high. I don't think they're so anymore, and that itself will set right. So the number of engineers graduating will start coming down at some point in time, as other areas, kind of offer, comparable opportunities. Hope that answers your question.
Just to add my 2 pies bit to this, I think both my panelists have adequately addressed what you're saying. I think we recognize that aptitude is extremely important, other than the intellectual capability. I also think India's, and particularly young people today, have far greater choice to pursue their aptitude today than it was at my time, when you were almost tunneled into going into certain professions. So I think India is recognizing this. I think education, awareness, a certain amount of consciousness is playing its part in letting people make their choices. Whether you want to be a Bharatanatyam dancer or want to be a freelance writer, be a journalist, etc., is really following your passion, following your heart. And I think people are recognizing this more and more, that it is not enough to get the highest number of marks in the exam, which is not your vasana, which is not your natural sort of way to go. I think organizations are also recognizing this, I think. So therefore, I just want to confirm your hypothesis that it is important. The second part of my whole thesis in terms of a response is, I think when you talk about talent and when you talk about the ability to move and make progress in terms of your career, particularly in the managerial world, and I restrict myself only to the managerial world, I think intellectual capacity is important. That is why the GMATs of this world, that is why the CATs of this world, they have proved beyond doubt over time that they test truly the intellectual capacity. And I'll explain to you why this intellectual capacity is required. Because as you move up in organizations, you are dealing with more and more complex issues. What does complexity mean? Complexity simply means that there are multiple variables that you need to deal with. A lift operator has to deal with only perhaps one variable. which is which floor does he have to press the button for. Whereas as you move up the organization hierarchy, complexity increases. You could take, your decision criteria changes. And therefore, there is a need for that intellectual capacity to make those judgments. Right? That is why people with greater intellectual capacity generally, unless there are other major derailers, I have great intellectual capacity, but I'm no good in my communication skills. I don't have team skills. I cannot collaborate with others. I'm an egoist of the highest order. If those derailers are reasonably manageable, then intellectual capacity will definitely take you to your potential. So that is the second point I want to make, which is not to deride intellectual capacity, because it's very important in organization. Increasingly, talent research is telling us that people who have that intellectual capacity are only those people who can move up the ladder. There are two other things that they talk about, but since you didn't ask me that, I will give it to you on a consultancy basis. Are there any other questions? This is a good session to have because it's very close to lunch, and therefore the intensity to ask and the intensity to question and challenge gets diminished, and it continues even post-lunch, because in India we also serve what is called curd rice, which has this great ability to bring the center of gravity down. So therefore, ladies and gentlemen, if we are more than happy because we have come here to answer questions I have a question here actually, which is, what are the three prerequisites to move up the value chain? I presume this is a question about moving up the individual's value chain. I presume it is about value chain in terms of a career. It is not about the value chain of how do we make better abrasives, which is a business that I'm involved with, or it is about how do we make better BSA cycles or better sugar. So if it is three prerequisites to move up, I can tell you the first one, and I'll let my two other panelists pick the second and the third. The first one to me is one's own passion to move up the value chain. I think that is the most important prerequisite. If I am not driven, there is nothing in this world that can make me move up the value chain. So the most fundamental prerequisite to me is, am I driven? Do I want to do and be different than what I am today? Is there something that I'm going to do which is going to be different tomorrow as compared to today? And I think for HRs, many of you are from the HR fraternity, and if I may, for a moment, be a bit of a patronizer, I think HR itself suffers from this drive. And I say this with the greatest of provocation prior to lunch, in saying, I think we as a function need to be far more driven in terms of what we set ourselves as targets, what we wish to achieve, and what we wish to deliver. So that's my first prerequisite in terms of moving up the value chain. I'll let you take the other two.
So I think maybe let me just restrict myself to HR, and there's something which I've noticed at some points in my career is that a lot of people have, and it's maybe an allied point to what Sridhar was saying, is that a lot of people have got into it as just any other job. And I think the important thing here is that it is not any other job. And in this, more than anything else, you need to have a very basic ability to connect with people, to like people, and to really kind of be able to reach out to them. And somewhere I've always felt that the criteria for selection into courses which which offer a degree or diploma in HR should be very different from that for other streams, because it is not another function like finance or logistics or production or marketing or anything like that. And what I've seen, at least we had a discussion on this a long time back, and we found that a lot of people who had got into it as a career choice, but were not really suited for that. So long as that changes, and the people who get into it have the really this need and the ability to connect, I think that would be that would make a big difference.
Thank you.
I think what I would say as an other thing which is very important to move up the value chain is to understand what are the needs of the organization, where the organization is heading, what are the objectives of the organization, and how what you do, whether you're a manager, whether you're a director, or whether you're just a housekeeper or a security guard, whatever you do, how it connects to the bigger organization. I think that's very important for you to move up the value chain.
So does that answer your question, Shekhar?
Yeah, thank you very much. There is also a second part. I don't know if you have the time.
I have, but I didn't understand,
What are the enablers?
what are the enablers? How is it different from the prerequisites? For example, being driven is an enabler. Do you have an aspiration?
Sometimes the prerequisites alone may not be enough, and that's the reason why it's looking at enablers.
Okay. All right. I'm getting more and more questions now. That means my consulting practice is doing all right and can compete with Ernst & Young, which is good. All right. This is a very good question I have here, which is, how do you engage the disengaged employee? Short answer, don't. Let the disengaged employee go. What do you think are the key major factors for disengagement today? Now, this is a subject which can take us a whole year in terms of discussion. I don't know whether we have that sort of luxury here. But I think to build on what Vishwanathan said, and I'll leave my panelists to respond to this, about the disengaged employee, I think fundamentally it is about finding a meaning at work. What is the reason for you to come to their house at Paris Corner at 9 o'clock on Monday morning? If you can't find that reason for you to come there happily, the chances are process of disengagement would start. So therefore, to be able to find something meaningful in what I am doing, meaningful that is unique to me, meaningful that is hugely personal to me, is what I think is the biggest HR challenge. HR practitioners, as HR practitioners, we are not spending sufficient time helping organizations to find this meaning and purpose. Right? I think it is not about making more profits. It is not about better margins. While they are important, but that's not what provides meaning. I think it is things like pride. It is things like being unique. It is by saying things like that I matter, which provides that uniqueness and meaning. And that is what causes and brings about engagement. And as long as that is missing, I think you're driving down the slope of disengagement.
Slightly, kind of different point of view. I think it's at one level, it's up to a person to decide whether they want to be engaged or not. And I think more and more we are getting into situations where people expect the organization to do this long list of things to help them feel good, or make them feel engaged. Just reminded of a small, kind of an incident. When we were in school, we had this extremely boring geography, teacher. And so he's talking about which crop is grown in which country and so on. So we set up a boy to ask a standard question after he finished each crop. So it was a nonsensical question. It was, does it grow in Zululand? Or the question was, what about Zululand? So it was a nonsensical question. Zululand doesn't exist. It's not a country or whatever it is separately. But it was just something, it was a question just asked for the sake of asking and to make the class a little, entertaining for people who are getting bored. Sometimes this gets taken into the organizational context. So no matter what you do, no matter what the organization tries to do, there is always this question which is asked, which are just for the sake of, which can never be answered. So getting people engaged and the organization to do things for that, it can never happen. It's a moving target. You can never reach it. Unless people from within themselves have ways and find ways of means of attaining a certain inner balance, which makes them be able to see things in the right perspective. You can see very highly engaged employees in seemingly the most ordinary of organizations. And you can see very disengaged employees in seemingly the most ideal or best of breed or, the best employers, in the world and so on. So this is just a, kind of a question which I'm asking is whether the inner, ability or the inner way in which you have a certain balance, are able to be engaged, is that more important in the current context?
Do you have a point of view?
I would say the individual, the organization, and the manager, all three have a role in keeping the employee engaged. However, I would still put the larger onus on the individual. Even in difficult organizations, even under difficult bosses, the individual can still be engaged, maybe to a lesser degree compared to a more favorable environment. But still, it's got to start with the individual.
Okay, I've got a couple of more questions. I also have another slip which says we are running out of time, and that means 1 course of your lunch is gone now. You okay with that?
Which would be the desert.
May not be. Curd rice is gone. Are we misguiding the future? This sounds very ominous to me. Where is, I can't understand. Can you read out?
Companies based on their financial stage. Okay, it says, are we misguiding the future? Where is more? Companies based on their financial stage, they have different price tags for similar resources, which could indirectly drive resources to choose money as priority. Then we worry about attrition and switch jobs. I won't read out the individual, since he's talking of switching jobs. I won't read out the name of the individual.
What is the question?
I don't know, is it a comment, is it a question? If the individual is still interested in standing up.
Or you might want to meet Vishwanathan privately during the lunch break. That might be helpful. All right, there is one question which says, with reference to statistics on employability, out of 5 lakh engineers passing out, only 10 to 15, 20% are employable. What is the industry's initiative to increase the employability to 30%? So that's a question from a consulting organization. I think from an industry point of view, I'll leave you to answer this from your Vistion point of view. From a Murugappa point of view, we believe in a concept called incubation. So wherever we take people from slightly what one might call slightly lesser backgrounds, and I say that with the greatest amount of sensitivity and understanding, people who come from far off places and not from the city, who do not have proper English skills and communications and so on. We let them, in order to bring them, we have started this very recently. So we can't sort of put our collars up and say we are past masters at this. We have just about made a humble start and said that few of them we will bring. We are looking at 12 people, and we will give them a sense of incubation, a sense of confidence that they can also work alongside the so-called urbanites and build their confidence so that over a period of time, they then become as equal to others in terms of their employability. The biggest problem that we have seen, and I personally work with one NGO in Tirunnamalai. I'm planning to go there in the beginning of the new year, where we see these young girls and boys, actually they lack a lot of confidence, and because they don't have the worldly exposure, they have never perhaps seen an air-conditioned office. They come from very humble backgrounds, very poor backgrounds, and therefore their opportunities to sharpen their capability is limited. So we have taken this as a case in terms of inclusive growth to say that we will take few people from here, try this out on a basis and see how it works. So that is what we have done to improve employability. The other thing that industry can do about employability is to be able to go backward in terms of integration and say we will offer programs to educational institutions in terms of projects, in terms of various assignments while they are studying, so that I think Ashok Leyland does this apparently very successfully in Uttaranchal, I'm told, with Pantnagar University. So those of you interested may contact HR in Ashok Leyland, and they can perhaps share what they do I'm told they do this very successfully. We do this with the Murugappa Polytechnic, which is in Ambattur, Avadi belt, and we have offered assignments to bring employability up. So those are two examples in a very limited sense, ladies and gentlemen. Please don't read too much into this. We're just about scratching the surface, and I think there is a lot to be done. All right? So that's my response.
There's also a kind of an initiative taken by Wipro, which is called Mission 10X, which has been going on for several years, which means increasing the employability by 10 times. And in an earlier firm where I worked, we did a lot of work with them in terms of building leadership capabilities in the principles of about 1,000 engineering colleges across the country. As well as, so that was the part we were engaged with. There were other, kind of partners who worked on, having very simple and easy to understand technical upgradation courses for the professors themselves, as well as certain gadgets and certain kinds of things which could be used for the students. So this has been going on for more than 5-6 years. So, and I understand even Infi also has something like that. Other than that, is, as Sridhar was saying, several engineering firms have tied up with ITIs and have very close association with ITIs.
Thank you, Rajiv. We've got one last question, which is specifically addressed to Mr. Vishwanathan. This has been his passion area. So, Vish, I'll get you answer this.
Okay. Thank you. This question is from Mr. A.M. Jailani, and the question reads, what needs to be done to increase patent enrolling by Indians? There are a couple of things that can be done. Firstly, increase awareness, and that can start from engineering colleges onwards. Increase awareness of patent regulations, patent filing, and the value of patents, and encourage inventors across the country to file for patents, and also provide a facilitation mechanism. Some of the countries have this concept where they actually subsidize legal fees required for filing patents, and government provides legal support for filing patents. So I think those are some initiatives that can be looked at. But as I mentioned in my presentation as well, I think something like government has started investor education programs. They need to start inventor education programs.
Thank you, Vish. Now the good news. Lunch is now going to be served in exactly a few minutes. So basically, I want to thank you, first of all, for being with us through this session, and for those never-ending stream of questions. I know some of them we couldn't answer comprehensively, shall I say. But we are more than happy to answer. Get hold of us and be in touch. One of the things I would encourage is to stay connected, and at any time we would be available to be of any help to anybody here. So on your behalf, I would like to thank my two eminent panelists here. I think you can do a little better than that. I think as you have done it, thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. So Vishwanathan, I think he brought in the concept of the brick and mortar, the need for talent, the need for intellectual capital, the national manufacturing plan, and what organizations can do. I think Rajiv, on the other hand, kept to the very focused area of saying what can we do in terms of talent management and what is talent and so on and so forth. So thank you very much, gentlemen. You made my life that much easier. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for your great patience and interest. Thank you, and have a great day today.
Thank you, sir. I request the dignitaries to please stay back, and I may now request Mr. Suresh Krishna, Member Managing Committee, MMA, to kindly present mementos to Mr. Sridhar Ganesh, the chairman of the session. To Mr. Rajiv Krishna, and to Mr. Vishwanathan.